So welcome, everyone. I'm Caroline Elliott. I work with the Cat River Education Alliance, your host tonight. Thank you for joining us. And many of you may know what CREA does, but for those who do not, these are just a few pictures from our programs. That building you see right here is our Ecology Center, which is the base for most of our programs. We host speakers like, as we are with Greg tonight. We have guided walks and other events. We have two educators who work with local schools, helping them develop science curriculums for elementary students and hosting field trips. And our field trips are very hands-on, place-based learning. We run a nature immersion summer camp out of the Ecology Center and have a very long waiting list for that this year, as we did last year. And in all of our work, our goal is to help people appreciate and understand the natural world, particularly the landscapes around us in our community. And we're supported in this work by our members. And if you value this kind of work, we hope you'll consider joining us. So this is just a peek at what's coming up. Next week, we have Mount Ararat biology students will be presenting the results of their field research, which they did at the preserve where our Ecology Center is located. And that's in person at the Topsham Public Library. And that's really a wonderful opportunity to learn, well, both to see sort of what the next generation is doing and learn a little bit about their findings from their research at the preserve. And then next month in March, a CREA alumnus or alumni, not sure which the right term is, who's a PhD candidate at UVM, will be talking about poplar trees and climate change. Poplar trees occur in a wide range of environments, and many of which are challenging environments. And he is studying what we can learn from them that might help us understand how our forests might respond to climate change. So I hope you'll join us for that. So without further ado, let's move on to, let's see, let me stop share. I'll introduce Greg. There we go.
Yeah, just one.
So Greg, you can share your screen anytime.
All right.
So let me just make sure. I want to make sure we're recording. I'm not seeing.
Let me know when you can see the screen.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Oh, there. Yeah, we are recording. So tonight, we're going to be learning from Greg about how community science gets started and how you can participate. Greg LeClair is the founder and coordinator of Maine Big Night and a PhD student at the University of Maine. He grew up in central Maine with a love for wildlife from his early days, and he's followed those passions into coordinating community science work, developing forensic tools to protect wildlife from poaching, and doing research that will help conserve our rarest species. So I'm going to spotlight you, Greg, and then you can take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody who is here today. You're all very lucky because you are seeing a first-time presentation of this particular presentation. A lot of you don't know, but Pat Maloney here in the audience, I've known Pat for a few years now, and she booked me a year ago for this talk. So I had to do something special and try to do a new talk for everybody today. So let's go ahead and talk about how this project came to be and some of the fun results so far. And first, I need to introduce you all to somebody. So this guy is me when I was about 7 years old. And this kid had already decided that he wanted to be a wildlife biologist. You can see from these photos, like in the top right here, I'm reading about how gecko feet work. And in this left photo, I'm playing with a coyote skull while my twin brother's in the background being a normal kid swinging a stick. So I had already decided that this was for me. So this is the type of kid that is going to have an experience that is going to start this project. And that experience happened just about 20 years ago. So hopefully you should be hearing some sounds coming through your speakers in just 2 seconds. So that sound is something that you've all hopefully heard before. That was the sound of spring peepers chorusing, and that is, of course, one of my favorite sounds of all time. I don't know about the rest of you, but anytime I'm driving past a wetland, I love to just roll my windows down in April and hear that on full blast. But that was the sound that formed the backdrop for my first big night experience. And if you don't know what a big night is, don't worry, we're going to talk about what that is in a second. But that sound formed the backdrop for my first experience, where my family and I, we were coming home from an outing. We're pulling into our driveway, walking to the front door. It's raining, it's warm, and we see a shadowy figure in the driveway. And that shadowy figure was a spotted salamander. Spotted salamanders are just amazing creatures. And you can imagine for this kid who had already known that he wants to work with wildlife growing up, how excited he must have been to find this animal, because first of all, spotted salamanders are pretty large. We're talking about a 6 or 7 inch long salamander, all black with bright yellow spots, just so cool looking. And one of the most fascinating animals out there for sure. I mean, this animal is the only animal in the world, the only one with a backbone anyway, that can photosynthesize like a plant to make food. Just a fun fact for you to enjoy. Basically, it has algae living in its skin that can somehow turn sunlight into food for this animal, which is kind of hilarious because this salamander is never out when the sun is out. She lives underground all year long and only comes up to the surface in the springtime to breed, only coming up at night. Really, the only time she's going to be able to enjoy this superpower is going to be in her juvenile stages, when she's essentially a tadpole. But anyway, here's 7-year-old me having his first experience with a spotted salamander. And if you were like me, you were rolling rocks and logs all over your family's property looking for salamanders before, and I had never seen this one because she was just so much deeper underground than all these other salamanders. So to find this was not only just exciting to see this animal, but surprising. So I had learned that in order to see this animal, I have to be looking for it basically in my driveway on warm, rainy nights in April. So for years after that, I would try to replicate the same thing, walk in my driveway on warm, rainy nights in April and see if I could find another one. And I quickly found out that it's a lot easier to not only look in my driveway, but to look pretty much anywhere where there's roads, because the more space you cover, the more things you're going to find. And as it turns out, there was more than just the spotted salamander. So for example, there's the wood frog, which to a lot of you is probably not a very exciting frog to look at, but I think he's particularly handsome. I mean, look at this awesome little black mask here. And one of my friends likes to say it looks like they're going to a fancy ball. And they really are. I mean, if you ever look in a pond in April, you might see a ball of wood frogs actually rolling around with each other as they attempt to mate. But this is also one of the most, let's see, how do I describe it? One of the toughest, one of the most extreme frogs out there. They're capable of surviving all the way up into the Arctic Circle. They're the northernmost amphibian in the world. And they're capable of doing that because they can freeze about 85% solid. Their heart will literally stop and they can somehow survive this. This is so fascinating that scientists have actually started looking at this ability of theirs as a way to actually help us travel into deep space. Can we do the same thing, freeze ourselves and last maybe hundreds of years while our spaceships travel and somehow survive it? I don't know, maybe we can, maybe we can't, but an amazing ability in such a unsuspecting little frog. And by the way, they make a little like quacking, clucking sound. So if you happen to be near a pool, you might be able to hear them. It's kind of like a little bark, 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 bark. kind of a cute sound in my opinion. But then there was also blue-spotted salamanders. These guys are very similar to the spotted salamanders you saw before, except instead of yellow, they have blue. And they're also a lot more rare here in Maine. And these guys have one of the most complex genetic systems of any animal out there, which I barely can describe it. So if you can't follow along with it, that's totally fine. I can't either, but I'm going to do my best to describe what's going on with these guys. So first of all, their genomes are something like 10 times the size of ours. They just have that much more genetic information. There's a whole lineage of this species that is all female. They are cloning themselves essentially by just stealing genes from other salamanders, and not just other blue-spotted salamanders. They can do this with the regular spotted salamander, the smallmouth salamander, Jefferson's tiger salamander, like all these other species that they're kind of hybridizing with to continue this all-female lineage. And just, I don't understand how it works. We get these really weird hybrids out there, which Maine is primarily hybrids of this species, but really fascinating. And all I can really do is just appreciate it. Like, I can't understand it, but I can appreciate it, I guess. And then there's other species like the spring peeper, where if you look closely, these guys are everywhere on these nights. So if you see something that looks like a pebble, odds are could actually be a spring peeper. And certainly we do hear them. And I challenge you, sometime this spring, try to find a spring peeper when it's calling, because I've only been able to do it once, and I have tried a lot. It's surprisingly hard to locate these guys when they're calling. But this is Maine's smallest frog. They're about the size of your fingernail, maybe a little bit bigger. And again, they're going to be found everywhere. And it's not just these species. We have about 12 others that can be found on these nights. And when all these amphibians are moving on the same night, that is what we call a big night. So big nights are these spring migrations where thousands of amphibians are moving in one location, and they're all moving to go from where they spent their winter to where they need to go to breed. And because amphibians are so sensitive to the environment around them, they can't produce their own body temperature. They need water in order to survive. Those limitations are what make big nights so explosive. And by the way, you can have more than one big night per season. You can have anywhere from 1 to 7 or more, but typically we have somewhere around 3 to 5 every year. So for a big night to happen, we need these like Goldilocks set of triggers to occur. First of all, it needs to be springtime, where in Maine, our biggest big nights tend to happen around mid-April, and that is getting a little bit earlier. I'll talk to you about the results of the project later, but this is something we do track, and it used to be about April 20th when the big nights were happening, and now it's more like April 15th, so we're creeping up a little bit in the year. The ground does need to be thawed out, not completely, but a good amount, because a lot of these amphibians are underground in the winter, and if it's still frozen, they're not going to be able to bust out. And it's also a really good fail-safe for these guys too, because you know those like warm days we get in February or January where suddenly it's like 60-something degrees? If an amphibian took that as a cue to move, they would certainly meet their death soon, because the next day could be 20 degrees or it could be below zero. So in order to thaw the ground, that is a lot of heat for a long time. So that is just another signal to the amphibian that not only is it warm, but it's like springtime, like you're safe to move now. It needs to be raining because, again, amphibians have very thin skin and they do dry out rather quickly. It doesn't need to be downpouring. Of course, more rain does usually equal more amphibians, but it's just got to be enough to keep the ground wet. And then temperatures should be around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. We do get movements all the way down to freezing. We'll find wood frogs moving at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still pretty rare, but they do move. But 45 degrees tends to be where we see the really big nights kicking off. And then if we get like a 50-degree night, that can be a pretty killer time. And to give you some context for how amazing these migrations are that are occurring literally in everybody's backyards, like even if you are in downtown Portland, we have identified wood frog migrations happening in downtown Portland. So these are happening everywhere in your own backyard. These are immense migrations. So for some comparisons, if we were to compare other migrations of other species to amphibians, let's equalize it by weight. So like pretend caribou, for example, are the same weight as a frog. Let's compare the distances these guys migrate. So compared to woodland caribou, they are essentially traveling the same distance, which caribou are traveling 400 miles for their migrations. By the way, I forgot to mention at the top, I am just getting over a head cold, so you might hear me like clear my voice or blow my nose here and there. So I apologize for that in advance. But anyway, 400-mile migration is essentially what's happening in our backyards with these guys. And it's 13 times greater than what's probably the most famous migration of all time, which is the wildebeest migration in the Serengeti. If you've ever seen a wildlife documentary, you've probably seen this migration where like wildebeest are trying to make it across the river and crocodiles are like snapping at these wildebeest. This is 13 times greater than that, which is just incredible. So for actual distances here, wood frogs in particular are moving about 3,000 feet, which is a long way for a guy that's only about 2 or 3 inches long. However, after following these guys for a couple of years, it didn't take long for me to realize that a lot of amphibians are ending up like this bullfrog here, where it's just hard to see frogs and salamanders in the road. And I'll skip past this slide so we don't have to look at the dead bullfrog for too long. But if you've ever been driving before, especially at night on a warm, rainy evening in April, you've probably seen frogs hopping along the road a little bit. But what you're probably not seeing are the frogs that are standing still, and almost certainly not the salamanders that are not moving fast enough to catch your eye. So as it turns out, roads are a pretty big issue for amphibians because not only are we unable to avoid most of them, we're hitting a lot of them. So to give you some context here, one study in Canada focused on one stretch of road over the course of 4 years, found 30,000 amphibians dead, mostly of one species, on that single stretch of road. Amphibians on average face what is called a mortality rate. So I can explain the math here a little bit. I'll give you the numbers first. So on average, a 21% mortality rate, which is like a 1 in 5 chance of being hit every time an amphibian crosses a road. So like, I don't know about you, but if somebody told me I had a 1 in 5 chance of being hit if I crossed the road right out here, I would not cross that road. Those are not good odds, right? And an amphibian could be crossing that road multiple times in its life. I mean, twice in a year, wants to go there and wants to come back, right? So not really great odds. But some roads can actually have a 100% chance of mortality because traffic is just so high, speed limits are high. There's just like no chance of anything actually making it across safely. And for those of you that like to think a little bit deeper about these things, there's actually genetic evidence that these animals are being separated so much that it's like showing up in their genetics now. They're like starting to look like almost essentially different species. They're starting off to separate because they can't reach each other to breed. There's no sharing of genetic information. And this is actually based on a paper that was done here in Maine, where essentially they found that frogs and salamanders north of the I-95 corridor are genetically distinct from those south of it. I mean, think about it. I-95, tons of traffic, things are moving fast. There's 2 lanes of traffic to cross for northbound and then 2 lanes for southbound. So it takes a lot to cross, right? So that signal is actually starting to show up in the genetics of these animals. So fast forward a few years for me, I'm no longer 7-year-old Greg playing in my driveway and like just poking out onto the road in front of my house. In high school, I started dragging my mother out there with me and making her drive me around to go to different places. And then in college, I started doing this on my own again and occasionally bringing friends with me. And I realized that, first of all, this is a lot of fun. Like, it's great to get a lot of people out there, especially friends who are equally as passionate about these things. We're having a great time finding these animals, helping them across the road. But I also realized that there might be an opportunity to make a difference here. But the problem is that roads are everywhere, right? So like, I can't be everywhere where roads exist in Maine to help amphibians. So is there something that I can do in order to help these guys out in a greater way? I mean, like, sure, I'm helping out this one salamander I moved here, but is that really going to make a difference for the entire Maine population of this amphibian? So that led me to start this project, which at the time I didn't have any name associated with it. This was 2018. I was a senior in my degree program at Unity College, and I was the president of what is called the Herpetology Club. And for those that don't know, herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. So by now I had assumed enough confidence to try something like this. I had seen a few incidents like this where other projects had put people out there in high visibility clothing and like stopped vehicles and like helped these things cross roads and collect data. So I was like, okay, other people have done this. This isn't happening where I am right now. So I'm gonna try to organize this, give it a shot. And you're looking at what the start was. This was about a dozen people where we had amassed a little bit of funding to get things like traffic cones and signage and vests and flagging. And we went out there in Unity to try to help these guys in a few different sites. And it had brought enough attention in the setup where we were actually able to get Bill Green from Bill Green's like Maine News Center, Maine news bit. Some of you might remember, I think that's been done for a few years now, but they had come out to film this and they were really optimistic that we were going to have like a really awesome time. And I mean, to be fair, we did sell them on it. We're like, yeah, come on out. We're going to get a bunch of frogs and salamanders and it's going to be like a really busy time. However, the problem is that the weather was not cooperating. We showed up, temperatures were in the high 30s, so it was cold. The rain hadn't even started yet. In fact, I was watching the radar on my phone for quite a while, and clouds that were supposed to be hitting us were just seemingly going right around Unity. It was just dry, it was cold, and I was really losing hope. And we were searching as much as we could, and finally the rain did start, and it took a little bit of time, but eventually, finally, we got our prize. We had this one lone male wood frog sneaking on by. It was the only amphibian we had seen in hours, but you can bet that the cameras were trained right on this guy as he made his way across the road. And this was my Hail Mary moment, because in this moment, finally, like we have like evidence to show people like, okay, this is a thing. We're not like crazy for being out here in these high visibility vests. And now finally, like the rest of the state of Maine was going to see what was happening. And luckily for us, it wasn't just this wood frog. Oh, he certainly was the center of attention, by the way. This is just a screen grab from News Center, Maine. So that is the wood frog that really brought this together here. But we had other amphibians too. The rain started coming down and more amphibians started coming out. So we had spring peepers galore. We had some blue spotted salamanders, and we got some good shots of the volunteers interacting with these animals. So thankfully, everything came together. We had a pretty decent news bit published about us, and we had our start for the project. So this was a success. This was 2018. We did it. We had 49 amphibians that we recorded on just a few nights. We surveyed 4 sites around the Unity area, about 12 volunteers in total. But again, it was only focused on the area of Unity. I think we had like 1 site in Thorndike and then 3 in Unity. Now, the other problem was that 2018 was my senior year at that college. So what happens after I graduate, right? So I'm leaving this college and moving at that point into Waterville. So I wasn't going to be a student there anymore. I wasn't going to be able to lead the herpetology club and do this project the same way. So I had to ask myself this question: what do I do now? Now that I'm graduating, can I still do this project the same way? And since I moved, I mean, really, it was only 20 miles away, but in my mind, that was enough to think like, okay, maybe I need to expand a little bit. So what you're looking at here is one of my first maps that I had put together of all the locations I identified around Maine that could potentially have a decent big night crossing. But I needed to figure out a way to identify these sites. This was after I had gone through some processes. So, I mean, without other information, I would just be looking at like satellite images, trying to find like wetlands near roads and just scanning, or maybe I would have to be driving around looking for these spots, right? So I needed some way to identify these sites around the state. And luckily, there are a lot of people out there that have done a lot of the heavy lifting for me. And that was through the Maine Significant Vernal Pool Program, which this is a program that protects vernal pools. These are significant wildlife habitats in the state. And they are inside these white circles here. You can see like there's a little pool. I don't know if you can see my mouse, hopefully you can, but if you look in the center of each of those circles, there is a little pool. And vernal pools, they are important amphibian breeding habitat because they don't have fish in them. They dry out at the end of every summer and they're not fed by like a river or anything like that. So that makes it a safe place to raise your little amphibian babies. So These are considered a special type of habitat resource in the state. So it's kept track of. People like take GPS points of these things and actually put them as public information. So I was able to download this and play around with it on Google Earth to find out where in the state there are potential big night sites. And I was able to flag quite a few of them. I think it was probably like 200-ish at first. So all these pink lines are sites that I had established based on the data provided from the state. And for those who want to know, this is Durham Road and Brunswick, which is definitely one of our more popular sites. So I'm putting this together, but I'm realizing that this is going to be a huge undertaking if I need to make this statewide, because first of all, at the time, this picture here, this was me working for the state doing turkey work. I had that field job going. I had this cute little kid who I'm trying to raise. And I also had grad school going on. So I had to figure out some way to balance everything so that I can have this amazing project happen at the same time. So how do I run a statewide project where it could have potentially hundreds of volunteers, but make it easy and not like an additional burden on all these things? So what I figured would be a good way to do would be, sorry, that was totally jumbled. What I figured would be a good direction to take would be to make this a self-guided experience where I provide the information to you, but it's up to you to essentially figure out where to go and what to do. Like I give you all that information, but like I'm hands off from there, which really I'm not. If you've participated in the project with me, you know that like I'll answer questions, like help you find where to go. But you know, that was the plan, right? Was to make this self-guided. So volunteers train themselves, which I also, again, do train volunteers on my own if I do have time. But ideally, in most situations, volunteers are training themselves. Volunteers collect data whenever they can. So I'm not telling people when to go out or that they have to go out now. It's just whenever you can make it work. And then automating other processes. So for example, a lot of time is spent on the back end of not only getting people to submit data and making that an efficient thing, but also controlling the data. So like weeding out things where people had recorded things incorrectly or wrote the wrong number down. So I essentially wrote like a few like spreadsheets and codes to like help weed these things out and make it quicker so that I don't have to spend hours and hours looking at these things. And then the other goal here was to create a community where people could essentially support themselves and I could be more hands off. So if somebody asks a question, there could be others there that can answer it accurately for them. And that was primarily done through our social media. Our Facebook group tends to be the best place to make this happen, but also things like talks like this one, right? Anything that I can do to bring in more people of varying backgrounds to help not only create like validity in the project, but like ensure its long-term survival just by having more like people involved and interested, right? A community is stronger when you just like have more interaction going on. So 2019 was a year of expansion for us. So again, remember 2018 was just in Unity. 2019 was the first time we went statewide. We recorded 376 amphibians, which is a lot better than just the 49 of 2018. We surveyed 18 sites throughout the state, but mostly along the coast. We trained 23 volunteers that year. And we had essentially established that goal of getting a statewide reach. I mean, it wasn't like the full span of the state, but it wasn't just Unity either. We had actually expanded. And this was also the year that I saw this as a project that could last for quite a while. So I set this charter or a few set of goals for the project, which I'm going to share with you now because this will be important later. And also just to give you background, I think, as to what the project is all about. But number one, we want to identify the significant and vulnerable amphibian migration routes throughout the state. And not only will this information apply to amphibians, but often other wildlife species as well. So for example, turtles. Turtles are one of the most endangered groups of animals out there, and we have a few endangered species here in Maine. Wherever things are tough for amphibians, it's probably also tough for turtles. They have pretty similar habitat requirements, similar size, right? Maybe a little bit easier to avoid, but still nonetheless good information to know. So identifying those routes is really important to the long-term conservation of these species and other wildlife species as well. Then we want to provide direct relief of road mortality on amphibians. And what that basically means is we want to make sure they don't get hit by cars. And that means either helping them across the road ourselves by picking them up and moving them, or using our data to help inform conservation plans, such as putting in a salamander tunnel, which is a tunnel under the road to let salamanders and frogs travel under the road safely. And finally, we want to provide an opportunity for community science members to participate in conservation and natural resource sciences. And when we say community members, I really do mean everybody. I mean, it could be like anybody that can be safe in the road is welcome to participate in this project. Like, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a professor, you don't have to be a student. You can be 3 years old, you can be 95 years old. I work one-on-one with people who have certain requirements. So if you have a disability or whatever it might be, I'm happy to work with you to find a place where you can go, feel safe, and participate in this. Because we certainly live in a day and time where we need to be hands-on with these things. We need to be seeing this stuff firsthand. And it's such a fun and exciting project. So I'll stop my rant about getting people involved there. Hopefully I'm starting to convince some of you, but we're going to move on to 2020, when everything was looking pretty decent until March. Maybe you can remember what might have happened in March of 2020, when amphibians were just starting to move. The COVID pandemic hit, right? Maine shut down everything. I remember being at Maine at the time and like all my classes getting shut down and like not knowing if I was going to be able to go to the grocery store, right? Like everything was getting taken off the shelves and whatever. So I was left to wonder, how can I run a community science project when this is what the world might be looking like? Like, can people even get together anymore? Can we even go outside and like be safe outside? So I actually started thinking about this and realized, wait a second, maybe this is the perfect time for a project like this, because first of all, it's outside, like you're not inside with other people. You're pretty spaced out from others. A lot of these people are operating in really small groups, and everyone is looking for an excuse to get outside. Everybody is locked indoors. Kids are going crazy. The parents are getting stir crazy. Like, everyone's looking for something to do. So this was actually a really perfect storm for us to get more volunteers. And I had actually too, I had been trying to get in contact with the governor's office when all this was going on to figure out if I could run this project. And I wasn't getting any information back. So what I ended up doing was I went on Instagram and direct messaged the commissioner of IFW to see if she could approve of this. And she did. She gave us her blessing. So I felt good running this project and just like having these stipulations in place, like, you know, stay within your family pods, don't like get too close to anybody, wear your mask if you're in a group, stuff like that. But this was a perfect thing to do during the pandemic. It was the perfect pandemic activity. So we had an immense boost in volunteerism, and you'll see the data on that in a second. This was also the first year that we got really big media coverage. Special thank you to Brandon Keem for this. Brandon is a nature writer who joined the project in 2019, and he pitched a story to the New York Times and got us in on that. And that was huge. So we had the CBC radio do an interview. We had an article in the Atlantic, and then the New York Times, and all of this was because of Brandon. So, and there's more to come in the coming years. So Brandon really does deserve a lot of credit for this. And that was just huge for the project. And this too also happened to be probably one of the greatest natural experiments of our time. When the COVID pandemic happened, people stopped moving. And you probably all remember stories of like wild boars running through cities, or like monkeys or deer, or like sea lions taking over parking lots, like these, you know, really interesting natural things happening. So we happened to notice something happening with our amphibians that year, and actually published a peer-reviewed scientific article on it, where we had actually found, actually the next slide will tell you about this. There were half as many amphibians killed on the road that year because there were so much less, there were so many less cars on the road, which is fantastic. And that led us to a question that a lot of other people are asking too, which is, will there be more amphibians as a result? Are populations about to see a boost from this? And I would love to say, hopefully, but I don't think so, because traffic levels went right back up to normal in summer when all the juveniles were hatching out of their ponds and migrating back into the forests. So maybe more of them have snuck through, and this would be the year where we start seeing that. A lot of them would be adults by this year. So I mean, I'm not completely writing it off, but I do want to like at least be realistic and say that it probably will not have a long-term positive effect, but it does give us an insight into the fact that we can have a significant impact on mortality if we just stay home on these nights. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like less people driving, less likely to have more amphibians run over. But this was the ammo for that, right? This is the data that has been peer reviewed and published to say that if you just drive less, we can actually have some sort of impact. So that springtime migration, try to avoid driving on warm, rainy nights. And then late summer, like August, same idea. Just try to stay off the road on warm, rainy nights to let the babies cross. But a lot of the babies are really going to be hunkering down anyway. So like this is the tricky part. We don't really know what the babies do as much. They could be right next to the pool. They could be hopping across the road. They're a lot harder to track. But anyway, some other findings that we got from the same paper that I like to share just because they're interesting. We found that frogs get hit more when it's warmer. We don't really know why. Just as temperatures increased, more frogs were getting hit compared to salamanders. Salamanders did not have the same effects. If it got warmer, salamanders were getting hit at the same rates, no matter what. And the exact same thing is true when it's raining. As more rain falls, more frogs get hit, but not with salamanders. Again, just more rain stayed the same for salamanders. We have no explanation for why that was, and we're still scratching our heads over it. So if anyone has any theories, please let us know. But yeah, just interesting stuff that we pulled from that same data set. So to wrap up what happened in 2020, we had 1,600 amphibians recorded, which another big jump, right? So 2019, I think it was like 350 about. So to go to 1,600 amphibians tells you how many more people were out there. We surveyed 69 sites throughout the state, and 87 volunteers were certified. We did also gain national and international recognition because of those news pieces that were done, as well as receive some financial gifts, which we'll talk about where that money went in a second. And partially, actually, that money went to that scientific publication because it actually does cost money to publish science. It's a little annoying to work with, but it costs something like $3,000 to publish that paper open access so that people wouldn't have to pay like $50 or something like that to read that paper. We wanted to make sure as many people could read that as possible. So after 2020 finished, we were asking this question to ourselves: what if somebody can't get the gear needed to participate? Because a community science project is for everybody. So what if somebody just can't find somewhere where the gear is or can't afford it? Or what if like somebody just isn't able to access a site nearby? Like all these what ifs, right? How do we increase participation in this project? Well, we used some of that money from the previous year to put together these participation kits that we sent throughout the state. They included anything from clipboards and headlamps to high visibility vests, both in adult and child sizes, as well as these really awesome custom made ID cards for this project by Michael Boardman. He is a wildlife artist who usually focuses on birds, but had offered to do this, and we commissioned it with him. So these are life-size illustrations, and they are waterproof ID cards as well, including a ruler, so you can just have a really easy time identifying anything out there. We have both the frogs and salamanders included. We are missing one species from those because we just didn't have enough space. If anybody's curious, that is the mink frog. That is the least likely amphibian let's see, how am I going to say this? That is the amphibian you are least likely to encounter because A, it just lives really far north in kind of pristine boreal habitats, and B, almost never leaves the water. But we have actually found one or two. So of course I was eating my words on that. But if you do want them, they are available at coyotes.com, and some of the profits do come back to the project on those. So please check that out, and check out Mike's other artworks as well. And these kits, by the way, they were distributed to different locations around the state that are functioning as kit hosts. So we have these, let's see, 9 locations throughout the state. So this covers our primary service area, but we do have a few folks like in northern Maine, and I'm looking to try to hopefully get somebody in the Bangor area that can provide kits. So if you want to participate and maybe you don't know that you're like ready to like fully commit and buy the gear for yourself, or you can't find the gear, these items are all available to rent out for free. You just have to make sure that you return them by the end of the year, which most people have. So for those that have, thank you so much. And if you're interested in being a kit host yourself, please let me know. I am out of funds to do it, but I can tell you everything that we had bought if you wanted to replicate it. So we'll include you on a list there, and people will reach out to you if they need any piece of equipment. So the other interesting thing that was happening in 2021 was that we were noticing these really weird problems happening with frogs. And actually, we had saw this happening in 2020, maybe even in 2019. But until then, we had thought that these were frogs that were super pregnant, and we were like really excited about it. Like, look how many eggs this female is holding on to. Just for some reason, these are like super females, just so many eggs. As it turns out, these are diseased animals. They're diseased by road salt pollution, where the salt is actually affecting their kidney function, and they're unable to regulate their liquids of whatever sort they might be, and they're ballooning up. They're not able to osmoregulate like they normally would. So they're filling up with essentially water. And I'm sure that's quite painful, but it also makes it very difficult for them to move, right? So in order to mate or escape predators or escape a car tire, for example. So there was a paper that came out in 2021 describing this issue, and we're like, oh my gosh, like we've actually been seeing this before. So we started tracking where these events are occurring, and it looks like this is really popular in, or common rather, in locations that are somewhat developed, but like still fairly rural. So for example, the outskirts of Camden and Gray. These are two places that we've seen these occur the most, where there's a lot of road salt being thrown down, but there's still a lot of amphibian populations nearby. And as far as we know, we're also the first and only people to identify this happening in a spring peeper, which is what you're seeing on the left. This has only been identified in wood frogs so far. So we're keeping track of this issue, and hopefully we come out with a publication about it in the coming years. So results about 2021. We recorded 5,700 amphibians. So we are still climbing in the number of amphibians seen every year. And remember, we had that humble beginning of just 49 in 2018. We surveyed 185 sites throughout the state. 316 volunteers were certified, and we distributed participation kits around the state. We hired an intern this year. That was another use of our money, where we hired an intern to do some mapping for us. We made our custom ID cards with Mike Boardman. We were tracking that new disease related to the road salt. We got some more media coverage, including my favorite so far, because I'm an NPR nerd. We were on All Things Considered with Ari Shapiro. So if either of you are NPR nerds like I am, check that out. We're on there. We also had an interview with Maine Calling, I believe, or that might have been the following year, but that was a big one for me. Definitely proud of that one. So a lot happened in 2021. But 2022 was this like 5-year midlife crisis for us, where a lot of these long-term science projects, 5 years is where we like to take a seat and like review things. Like, okay, are things going as we like? Are we accomplishing everything? So I had this like kind of prophetic moment where I'm like, what are we doing with this project? Like, are we really making an impact yet? So I went back to the goals and reviewed them. So again, we want to help amphibians cross the road. We want to get people participating in natural resource sciences, but then there's the other one of identifying these conservation priority areas. And we hadn't really done that yet. Like, we've been collecting data for 5 years now, but we haven't really like compiled that data to say like, these are hotspots and like, this is why, and we should be focusing on these areas. So 2022 was the year that we really put some energy into that. And the reason why it's important to do these analyses is to determine where to put these. So these are salamander tunnels, or frog tunnels, or turtle tunnels. You can call them whatever you want, but they all do the same thing. And we would love to give these to every site that we have, but we have about 500 sites around the state at the moment. And each of these can cost probably anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million each. So we need to make sure that we are using our resources properly, right? Like, there's just not enough money to make all these happen. So we need to find the areas that need these the most. So how do we decide where these go? The easiest way might be to look at who is the deadliest road in the state. So here's like a little sneak peek at where the deadliest roads are around the state. So coming at number 5 here, so we're gonna talk about the top 5. Boyd's Corner Road in South Berwick, which on average has about a 60% mortality. So about 6 in 10 amphibians found there are found dead. Then there's Durham Road in Brunswick, which is about 64% mortality. Center Road in Gray, 65%. Thorndike Road and Unity, 70%. And then Forest Avenue and Orono, about 70%. And there's actually 12 sites on the Forest Avenue stretch. So there's quite a lot going on there in Forest Avenue. So we can look at mortality rate and pick out these sites pretty easily. Like, okay, things are really deadly at these 5 sites. But what about things like rare species? Does that impact what sites get a tunnel? Because I mean, a blue-spotted salamander, you won't find that everywhere in the state. So like, what if one of these sites kicked out a site with a blue-spotted salamander where blue spots really need that? So we had to weigh other things like that as well. So rare species, are they there? How many amphibians are actually being seen there? Because if we put a tunnel in a location where it's like 100% road mortality, but there's only been 2 amphibians ever recorded there, so like only 2 dead spring peepers, for example, do we really want to put a tunnel there where we've only ever seen 2 amphibians, even though it's technically 100% road mortality? And then what about the population? Is it likely to exist if we put this in place? If we don't put it there and it persists, then maybe we don't need to. But if we put it there and it persists only because of us putting the tunnel there, then it's probably a good tunnel to put, right? And then we also needed to consider whether or not there was enough survey time at each site. So we had actually limited our analysis to only sites that had at least an hour of survey. In fact, it might have even been 2 hours of survey. So we had a lot of confidence that like, if people were finding, certain numbers, that odds are it's probably accurate. So here's a map I actually just threw together recently of our 2022 data to get your gears turning about where might be some good spots to put some tunnels. Basically, the size of the circle is how many amphibians were found at that location, and then the color is how many were found dead. So the redder the circle, the more were found dead. So you can see kind of an interesting trend. First of all, like if you look to southern Maine, south of Portland, going along the I-95 corridor, you see a lot of small circles. So that is probably indicative of the fact that there are not a lot of amphibians left here. And that might mean that it might be almost in vain to put a tunnel here. Maybe there's a spot where a tunnel would be good and like populations can reboost themselves, but there's so much urban development there that maybe a population can't exist there now anyway, which is kind of sad to think about, but that does lead us to look at other sites that might be more deserving. For example, like look at these really big green circles in the center of the state. This is, I believe, around the Booth Bay Edgecombe region. You got some big green circles, then you got some red, and then you got some like little red and green ones in here as well. That could be a good spot to throw some tunnels because you got some pretty decent populations around that can help support these smaller ones. Or then look at Bangor Orono. This is like the sore red spot on the state. So we have these towns that are like on the outskirts of these big cities like Orono, where there's still a ton of amphibian habitat. There's still a huge population of amphibians, but because of the traffic from the local city, things are crazy. Like there's just an insane amount of mortality going on. So that's what you're seeing up there in Bangor Orono. So it's information like this that we use to come up with a finalized list of 30 sites that we proposed to the Maine Department of Transportation for getting these salamander tunnels installed. All these blue stars are the locations that we proposed. That was a combination of all the factors that I had introduced on the last slide and talked about with you here. We made these like weighted mathematical models to come up with these locations. So these are what we're currently proposing to the state that will hopefully end up being installed in the next, 1 to 10 years. There's no real time on this yet. There are grants out there that I'm hoping that we can be pursuing to like get these things installed, including through the federal government, specifically for wildlife road crossings. So we'll see where this goes, but if you live near any one of these locations, please feel free to advocate for them to the state and keep the ball rolling on this, because I would love to see this project actually have such a profound permanent impact on amphibian and other wildlife species as well. So to sum up 2022, we had 8,500 amphibians recorded, so even more than the last year, 246 sites surveyed, 361 volunteers certified, and we identified those top 30 sites for tunnel placement. We also did a really neat thing this year, which was integrating an app for our data collection. If you participate in the project now, you can actually download like a data recording form onto your phone and make the whole data recording process even easier, because you won't be writing on a piece of paper that's getting soaked in the rain. So to total up how the project has done over the past 5 years, now coming into its 6th season, we have recorded over 1,600, or sorry, I'll just say 16,000 before I trip myself up trying to figure out how to say 1,600 or, whatever. So 16,000 amphibians recorded. And about a third of those, by the way, are dead. So around 5,000 of those are dead and about 10,000 of those are alive. About 91 straight days of survey time, thanks to all of our volunteers. We have surveyed 318 unique sites throughout the state, including all the way up there. You can see up in St. Agatha, we had our first survey in Aroostook last year, which is just awesome. So I believe that means we have actually hit every county in Maine, at least a little bit. Somerset might be the only one. Actually, no, we got stuff in Fairfield, and Fairfield is the south end of Somerset, so it counts. So we've had every county covered now. As well as like the down east region, all the way down the southern end of the state, getting into the Western Maine Mountains. So we've been doing pretty good. Of course, I'm hoping to continue expanding, but I'm really proud of all the area that we've covered so far. And I don't have a good estimate on this because it changes every year and people bring untold amounts of people with them, but it could be thousands of people that have participated in this project now. I expect that everybody who does participate is bringing at least one other person with them. We've had at least 500 unique people certify in the project. So it's at least 1,000 people that have participated. Some people are bringing 10, some people are bringing 20. So it could be quite a lot that have done this now. And I know there's even more that are participating unofficially. So this project has just grown immensely. And like, just think back to that 2018 slide when it was 49 amphibians recorded, 12 people participating, 4 sites. Like, we have grown so much over the course of 5 years. And I'm just so excited, so proud of all of our volunteers, for everybody that's helped this project so far. We've just like had anything from artists to scientists to folks who work in media, just all sorts of different backgrounds in this community science project, right? Everybody has like had a unique impact. And if you're thinking like, oh, I have this like really cool skill set that I could apply to this project, please reach out, because I would love to utilize as many different skill sets as we can out there. So what's next for the project? This is just kind of like a rambling on list to give you some idea of what we're thinking about, but we definitely have some research projects planned, focusing on things of like, what are the predictors of where wildlife road mortality hotspots are going to be? Social influences of the project is something that I'm really interested to see. Like, how has this changed people's opinions about wildlife or science or like nature? Amphibian diseases, again, with that like ballooning of the frogs, we're definitely paying attention to that. Amphibian population trends for sure. And then data reliability. There's a fellow out of University of New England who's going to be leading this up, I think, in the next year or two, where he's going to try and figure out, are we finding every living amphibian while we're out there, or are some like dodging us? Basically, we're trying to figure out how accurate our numbers are. And then we're also conducting targeted surveys for rare species, including the spring salamander. That is one that I'm really trying to get to in the Western Maine Mountains. So if you're calling in right now from the Western Maine Mountains, I really want to hear from you. Continue annual surveys as normal, continue increasing access to as many different backgrounds as we can. But I want to pose this question to all of you, which feel free to throw this in the chat. Just what would you like to see come of this project? Is there anything that you feel is missing? Because I am only one brain. I have other people I consult for this project, but I really do value input. So please feel free to pitch some ideas to us here. So thank you all so much for listening to me ramble about this project. I hope I've inspired a few of you to perhaps join us this spring. We are only 2 weeks away from the project starting. So be ready, amphibians are coming, especially if you're in the southern end of the state, March 15th, things could be moving. So thank you again, everybody, so much. If you have any questions or want to keep in touch, there is my contact information as well as contact information for the project. I have so many people to acknowledge as well, so please feel free to read through all the wonderful names there. But for now, I'll answer questions. Feel free to shoot me an email or message.
And Greg, while you can take a look at the chat, I will just tell people that I will send a follow-on email in the next couple of days with all of those resources and a link to your website, so that everybody has them. So so folks don't have to write it down. I'll send it to your email in the next couple of days.
Perfect. All right, so I'm starting from the first question here from Caroline. Let's see. How much differentiation in species still able to mate and reproduce? That must have been in reference to the blue-spotted salamanders. So blue spots are part of Ambystoma, which is a genus called the mole salamanders. So the spotteds and blue spotteds are both in Ambystoma, and they're able to essentially reproduce with anything that's in Ambystoma. Includes tiger salamanders, smallmouth, Jeffersons, all sorts of different species. Will CREA be offering kits? Good question, I think, for Caroline.
Yeah, I would love to put together some kits. So we will work on that and hoping to host kits. I know we have the vests already, but we need to get more. But I think you'll just have to check back with us as to when we have them.
Perfect. Let's see, in regards to road salt, what's missing? Advocating for reduction of use of road salt. So I'm not as familiar with the road salt regimes that currently exist, but from what I understand, that there are more environmentally friendly ways to disperse salt, either less or I don't know. It's tricky because I don't want to tell people the solution is less road salt and then have that be like a deadly solution for people. There's something we do have to balance there. So I'm not really sure what the solution is. I have heard of towns adopting different salting regimes to protect vernal pools. Maybe it's about like the location, but there's certainly something that could be done there wish I had a better answer for you, but it's a non-specific answer for you, sorry. How many people do the kits cover? It really depends on how many people you want to cover. I provide a certain amount to every group, and usually that amount is based on the amount of interest in the area. So for an organization like CREA, I would probably provide enough equipment for anywhere from like 20 to 30 people. So if you went in to sign out some equipment, you could sign out enough equipment for however many people were in your party. We do just require that you have to be a certified volunteer to check out the equipment. Oh, the ID cards are sold out. Okay, I'll have to put a bug into Mike's ear to make sure he restocks those.
Is there a way to like print them out, or are they what do you call it, copyrighted and
yeah, they're copyrighted, so you would have to go through Mike. Which I do know you can also, if you live near an Audubon center, they're usually for sale in the Audubon centers as well. And then Freeport Bird Supply used to have them as well. So hopefully you live near one of those locations and can look to see if there are any extras left. How do we make sure the critters use the tunnel? Yeah, great question, because you better believe there have been times when people have put a tunnel in place and everything goes around the tunnel and still is going over the road. So how do you make sure they use the tunnel? A lot of it comes down to the actual placement and then using guides to make sure that the animals are actually using the tunnel. And those guides are usually just in the form of walls of some sort, be it a fence or like a cement wall, or even just like landscaping cloth that's like stapled to yard stakes. That's usually enough to funnel the animals to the tunnels. And I mean, it can be a really cheap solution that makes a huge difference. And so I think that answers the following question, which is how the tunnels attract amphibians to them. It's all about funneling them to those tunnels, because amphibians are not going to know that that's the safe route. And I will say too, there's also really important things about the design of these tunnels where the roof of it needs to be slotted and the ground needs to be natural. It cannot be concrete, because again, amphibians need that moisture and they need to be regulating their temperature with the environment. So if it's concrete and closed off, it's going to be dry. It's probably going to be colder than the environment that they're coming from. So those things that make it more natural are going to make it a lot more suitable for amphibians. How do you determine mortality rate when volunteers assist amphibians across the road? That is a great question. So the mortality rate numbers that we do present are assuming this is going on, like people are helping them across the road. So these are the mortality rates with a volunteer present. The other problem, the opposite of that, would be if we recorded mortality rate without people there. But that problem is that we're seeing a lot more dead amphibians compared to living ones because dead amphibians don't move, living ones do. So if we had let volunteers wait and then go and just record things like an hour later, that would still be a biased result. So that's why we have somebody who's going to be looking into our data in the next couple of years to see how accurate our estimates actually are, to make sure we're not too biased in either direction. That is a great question. Do volunteers return each spring to gather data? Yes, we have probably at this point over 100 returning volunteers every year. It becomes more and more every year. So I've been actually signing out sites already this year to our returning volunteers. Today is the last day for returning volunteers to get priority on sites. So if you're listening to this and you're a returning volunteer, today is your last day to get a site all to yourself before having to battle other people for it. So if you're new to it, you'll be able to sign out sites starting tomorrow. Let's see. Yeah, I like that idea. Required salamander tunnels in places where culverts are already placed. That is definitely something we've also looked into with DOT. Like, can we like use the culverts that already exist to just have a low cost solution? It does not look like that's going to be an easy thing to do because, again, there needs to be specific requirements in place for salamanders and frogs to use these things already. I will say there was one time I looked in a culvert in springtime and saw dozens of spotted salamanders using it, but I have never seen it again. So I don't know what conditions came to make that happen. But I mean, the state is already very busy retrofitting a lot of these culverts for things like brook trout. So it would be a very similar idea to what they're already doing, just making regular culverts into wildlife friendly ones.
Greg, could you give just a brief description of what it looks like when a volunteer is out on big night, like basically what they're doing?
Yeah, let me back up to the previous slide so you can see that a little bit more. There's a few scenes here of what volunteers are up to while they're collecting data. So you arrive at your site. Most people drive to their sites, but some are lucky enough to be within walking distance, and they're wearing their high visibility vest and flashlight, which are both required. They have their data sheet or their phone to record data, and they're walking their sites. Their sites are 3,000 feet long, or sorry, 1,000 feet long, not 3,000. So they have quite a bit of space to walk back and forth to find out where the amphibians are migrating on their site. And if they find a living one, they will pick it up like you see like in the two photos on the bottom right, and they'll move it to a safe location on the other side. If they find a dead one, they record the data just the same, just that it's dead. And then I know most people don't, or not everybody does this, but what I do ask everybody to do is to move the dead one out of the road to make sure you don't double count it later. And how some people do that really varies. Like I am at the point where I just end up doing it with like a gloved hand or sometimes a bare hand, but other people use anything from spatulas to other forms of equipment to move these things out of the road. So you're collecting data, you're not stopping traffic. I really wish that I could tell people to like stop traffic or actually shut roads down. But again, we have 500 sites around the state. I can't ask the state to shut down 500 roads, especially a lot of these ones that are really important roads. If you do want to experience something like that, I highly recommend checking out Shabig and Cumberland Land Trust. They do shut down a road in Cumberland every year with law enforcement. They just post up police officers at either end and shut the road down, and you get to have a really safe, family-friendly time out there, moving amphibians, getting to talk to a bunch of people. And then whenever you're done, you go home. So you can go home after half an hour of survey or 2 hours. Sometimes I'm out there till 2 or 3 in the morning. It can be pretty busy.
And do you put like traffic cones out to just sort of alert drivers to the fact that there are people present?
Yeah, if you have them, please do. I have a little like light up like triangular thing that I put like a few hundred feet from my car. I've also got like a blinking like yellow light that I put on top of my car so people know that I'm going to be stopping frequently and that it keeps my car visible too while I'm parked on the side of the road. So anything you have that can help increase your visibility without actually affecting traffic flow is great.
And can you just give a very quick description of the training so people have a sense of what's involved there?
Yeah, training is really simple. It's designed to be simple. So essentially it's anywhere from a 20-minute to a 2-hour read of a handbook. It really depends on how fast of a reader you are, but it lists everything you need to know in relatively plain language. And then you take a training quiz online, and it's an open notes quiz that you can take as many times as you want. And that quiz will ask you anything from how to be safe to how to collect quality data to how to identify and handle amphibians. So we use that quiz to make sure that you've learned the information you're supposed to learn and essentially certify that our data is going to be the quality that it needs to be. And these are measures, by the way, that are informed from other scientific studies that have found that if you give this training to regular everyday community members, the data they collect is equally, if not more valid than that of other scientists, which is really cool.
And I can attest, I did the training a couple of weeks ago, and I would say it took me 45 minutes to an hour, and it was really interesting. It was a little nerve-wracking taking the test.
Well, like I said, if you fail, you can take it as many times as you want, and it's open notes. So I can't see people if they're cheating or not. So that's why it's just like, do it as you can.
Great. Let's see. I think that's it for questions. There was one, Pat is asking, does each person complete data sheets?
What was the question?
Does each person complete data sheets?
Oh, so if you have like multiple people out there, only one person is filling out a data sheet. Usually, so how we like try to structure it is that certified volunteers are the ones that are like holding the data sheet and filling it out to make sure that that data is accurate. But other people can certainly be contributing to that data. Like you can have like 5 friends all looking for frogs and salamanders for you while you're recording data.
I think that's it. This has been a fantastic presentation. I'm so glad that you knew Pat, because you put together a fantastic presentation. I hope you use it other places. So for everybody who's here, I'll be sending out in the next couple of days links, and I'll include some links to the training and to the data sheets and all that information. But thank you so much, Greg. This has just been so informative and very inspiring. So I'm hoping that and I will also include, I think we're going to set up a place to sort of send in your name and email. And I think what we hope to do is I'm now certified, and I have a couple of other people who I think are going to get certified. And this is obviously something that can only happen on sort of a last minute basis, but as we identify the conditions in which amphibians will be moving, I think we'll just send out an email to folks who sign up and say, you know, so-and-so is going to be here at this site on this day. You know, it may be the same day. What do you find, Greg, is do you generally not know until the actual day, or can you sort of anticipate it maybe a day ahead?
Yeah, so it really changes so much. I mean, it's predicting weather more than anything else, right? So sometimes it's clear, like the pattern sticks over the course of a week, like, okay, that is definitely going to be a night to go out, but then sometimes it can just switch immediately. So my recommendation is to focus on our social media, our Twitter, our Facebook, and I'm also going to try to start using email more and hopefully send out alerts that like tonight looks good. Get out there if you can.
Okay. That's a great tip. So so we will try to get information out to you, and as Greg said, you don't have to be trained yourself, but you have to be going to a site where there is someone who's certified. But if you're willing to do the training, then you can do it independently, and we'll try to put some kits together.
Perfect.
Great. So thank you so much again, Greg. This has just been a fantastic presentation. So I can't wait to put it up on the website, and it'll be available, and you can, oh, I see a bunch of thumbs up from John O'Brien and friends.
Thank you for all the kind comments, everybody. And Emily, I just sent all your information to you and Scott too. So excited to have you guys again this year.
Great. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.